So do you think the raid on Mar-a-Lago was justified? That question was asked by Wall Street Journal, and more than half of registered voters who answered the question believed the investigation was, quote, appropriate. But for voters who disagreed with the raid, they thought the investigation was, quote, another example of the endless witch hunt and harassment that the Democrats and Biden administration continued to pursue against former President Trump. And will the FBI's search impact voter turnout in November's midterms? 51% of voters surveyed said it would not. But among just Republicans, a majority said it actually makes them more likely to vote. Professor Alan Dershowitz, author of the book, The Price of Principle, joins me now. Professor Dershowitz, it's always great to see you, especially on a Friday night, long weekend here. So we wait for this decision by the special master issue. But we have this detailed inventory, a lot more detailed than the first version. What stands out to you?
Well, I think a lot of people are missing the point. It's not what's in the inventory. That won't get Trump in trouble. It's what's not in the inventory. If the inventory can demonstrate that there are documents that are missing, that were destroyed, that were hidden, that were moved, that would help make the obstruction case, which is the only case that would survive. I don't think that we're going to see indictments based on mishandling of classified information. We saw that, of course, with Hillary Clinton. We saw that, of course, with Berger. That won't happen. But if there can be a case of willful destruction, I haven't seen the evidence of that up to now, but that's why it's important what these empty envelopes might have contained. So it's not what's in the inventory, it's what's not in the inventory.
And Professor Dershowitz, a key in all of this will be the government having to prove intent here, and that's a pretty high standard.
They're not going to be able to prove intent, I don't believe. You need to show a corrupt intent. Laziness is not enough. Selfishness is not enough. Thinking you're above the law is not enough. There has to be something much more serious than that. Did he want to sell them? Of course not. Did he want to give them to China? Of course not. So I think they will have a very uphill job in trying to create a indictable offense. Look, you can get an indictment for anything. You can indict a ham sandwich. In the District of Columbia, you can indict a jelly sandwich. It's the easiest thing to do. The question is, should they do it? And unless it meets the two standards that I've set out, the Richard Nixon standard is there bipartisan support, which there's not, or the Hillary Clinton standard. Did he do anything much worse than she did? So far, those standards have not, but it's an open case still.
Yeah, let's talk about Judge Cannon. She will issue a written order on this master. Your thoughts on her taking a bit of time of this? Of course, the DOJ has said it would be a significant disruption to its case. That's their argument. Is that even an accurate statement, Professor Dershowitz?
No, it's not. It's a phony excuse. Of course, she should appoint the master, but she's probably going to want to write a long decision because the government will probably appeal it if she appoints a master. No, maybe she was persuaded not to. The government made a pretty strong showing in court the other day, but I don't see any legitimate reason for allowing the Justice Department to monitor itself. You need an outside person, a distinguished person, looking over the shoulder of the Justice Department. Otherwise, who will guard the guardians? The Romans asked that question, and the question is just as important today.
Yeah, it sure is. And let's talk about one of the things the government was trying to argue, and that's the issue of Trump and his ability to assert privilege. Judge Cannon in this hearing yesterday said it's not as cut as dry as the DOJ suggests. Is that significant at all to hear her say that?
Of course it is. There are issues of privilege. There are lawyer-client privileges, executive privilege. There may be privileges against self-incrimination, although that generally doesn't apply to documents that have already been seized. But the privilege issues are very important. And what is the government afraid of? If there are no issues of privilege, then the special master will say everything can be turned over. What shouldn't happen is the Justice Department reading privileged information on the assumption that they won't turn it over to the real prosecutors. In my experience, you can't trust that. They have lunch together, a wink and a nod, a shaking of the head. They should not be evaluating these documents in the Justice Department. There should be an outside person who does it. I don't know what their judge will rule. I know what she should rule. She should rule in favor of a special.
We have just about a minute left, Professor Dershowitz, but I do want to get your reaction to the newly hired Christopher Kise, former Florida Solicitor General, who is on the case now. He left his firm to take this job. Obviously, there was a lot of talk of who would Trump hire, who would want to take this. Your thoughts on him being an addition to the team here?
Well, I think the team needs additions, and I think they're going to have trouble getting elite lawyers who are not Republicans, because essentially of what happened to me. I'm a liberal Democrat. I defended the Constitution on behalf of President Trump, and I have been completely canceled by the left, by libraries, by speaking venues, and a lot of lawyers have already told me they won't take the case, even though they'd love to take it, because they don't want to be Dershowitz'd. That's become a verb now, and it's become a way of denying Trump his Sixth Amendment right to counsel.
Well, obviously, we'll be watching his comments tomorrow during his rally in Pennsylvania, but we certainly appreciate all your insight tonight. Professor Alan Dershowitz, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on The Record.
Thank you.